I never imagined my life would come to this. Not at 73, not after all I've survived. I've buried a husband, I've carried a sick child through endless nights, I've stretched a single paycheck across an entire month, and still found a way to feed not just my boy, but half the neighborhood kids who always seem to wander through my kitchen around dinner time. I've always believed in showing up. Showing up for family. Showing up for people, no matter how tired you are or how little you have left. And I did that. Every single day, for decades. That's what makes what happened all the more cruel. It started like any other Thursday. I woke up early, like I always do, before the sun warms the kitchen tiles. I made myself a cup of Earl Grey, real leaves, not the bagged kind, with a splash of milk and a spoon of honey. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you only earn after years of noise and raising children. I sat at the table with my tea and a half-toasted English muffin, staring out the window at my garden, where the daisies were just starting to wake up. I didn't know it then, but it would be the last morning I ever felt truly safe in that kitchen. I opened my bank app. Just something I do, a little habit I picked up after retirement. I like to keep track of things. I'm not one to let money sit unnoticed, even if it's just a couple dollars. But this time, something was wrong. The numbers were off. My savings account, the one I'd built up slowly, week by week, sacrificing dinners out and buying used clothes just to make sure I'd have a cushion, was nearly empty. My emergency fund, which I hadn't touched in years, was gone. And my checking account held just enough to cover the electric bill. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe I'd clicked the wrong thing. Maybe there was a glitch. I refreshed the app. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing changed. I could feel my hands starting to sweat, even though the tea was still warm in my palms. My heart started to beat, that awful thud you feel when you know something is wrong but you're too scared to say it out loud. I called the bank right away. I still remember the hold music, the way it chirped like everything was fine. When the woman answered, her tone shifted the moment I gave her my name. She told me there had been multiple transfers. Large ones. Thousands of dollars, moved out of my accounts over the last few months. I didn't recognize the account they were going to, but apparently it was under my name. Only it wasn't mine. It had been set up by someone else. Someone with access. Someone who knew enough about me to answer security questions and dodge suspicion. When I asked who, I braced myself. I already knew, in my gut, before she said the name. Daniel. My only son. My boy. The person I gave everything to, without a second thought. I think I stopped breathing for a minute. My mind tried to argue with what I'd just heard. Not Daniel. Not my son. The boy I raised by myself after his father walked out. The boy who used to sneak dandelions in from the yard and leave them in jelly jars on my nightstand. The boy I stayed up all night with when he had asthma attacks, rocking him in the bathroom with the shower steaming, humming old gospel songs just to calm us both down. He would never do this. But the numbers didn't lie. The account didn't lie. And worst of all, the voice inside me, the one I always try to quiet, wasn't surprised. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, in the same seat I'd used to help Daniel with his homework when he was 10. The light above me flickered a little, and I could hear the old fridge humming in the background. I didn't touch my dinner. I just sat there, staring at a single bank statement I'd printed out. The lines of text blurred until I couldn't see them anymore. I wasn't crying. Not yet. I was just empty. I kept replaying the past few years in my head. The times he'd asked for help. The way he insisted I let him take care of my finances so I wouldn't have to stress. The way I thought he was being thoughtful. I felt like a fool. Worse than a fool, I felt erased. Like I was never a mother, never a person, just a well he dipped into whenever he needed to fill up his own cup. He didn't even ask. Didn't even warn me. Just quietly, methodically, took. I thought about all the birthdays I'd paid for, the rent checks I'd written, the groceries I'd stocked in his fridge when he was between jobs. I'd even taken care of his daughter, my sweet little Emmy, for 6 straight months while he and his wife figured things out. And I'd done it happily. Because that's what family does. That's what I do. The next morning, I woke up after barely sleeping and stared at the ceiling. My chest felt heavy. Not from age, not from some illness. From heartbreak. I moved slow that day, like I was walking underwater. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't yell. I didn't text. I just moved. Put one foot in front of the other and started gathering papers. Bank statements. Password logs. Anything that showed my name. I had never felt so tired in my life. But I knew what I had to do. I had to protect what little I had left. Even if it meant turning on the very person I brought into this world. I walked into the police station with my papers in a manila envelope. The young man at the desk looked surprised to see me. Maybe he thought I was lost. Maybe he thought I was there to report a missing cat. I told him, clear as I could, my son stole from me. I need to file a report. I sat there, under fluorescent lights that made everything feel colder, and told my story. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just told the truth. And the truth hurt more than I can explain. Because saying it out loud made it real. Made it final. And I think a part of me still wanted it to be a mistake. When I got back home, the house felt different. Not physically, everything was still in its place. The photos on the mantel. The stack of magazines by the recliner. The faint scent of lavender from the candle I always light in the evenings. But something had shifted. I realized then that the betrayal had changed not just my circumstances, but my sense of home. Of safety. Of motherhood. I went into the guest room, the one Daniel used to sleep in during college breaks, and took down the framed photo of him and Emmy. I wrapped it in a towel and tucked it in the back of the closet. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it to breathe. Because every time I looked at that picture, it felt like a lie was staring back at me. I needed space. Space to think. To grieve. To stop pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. And in that space, something strange began to grow. A thought I hadn't entertained in years. A question, really. One that buzzed in the back of my mind like a tiny, persistent fly. What about me? What if, for once, I stopped being the one everyone leaned on? What if I stood up, not just to Daniel, but to the idea that my worth was tied to how much I gave? My life of giving. I suppose I should start at the beginning, though beginnings are never as neat as people think. My life has been a long series of small sacrifices, not the grand, cinematic kind, but the quiet, invisible ones. The kind where you give up the last piece of pie so your child can have seconds. The kind where you say yes to working late, again, even though your knees ache and your back feels like it might snap in half. I didn't think of it as giving, back then. It was just life. You did what needed to be done because no one else was going to do it. When I married Richard, I was 22, with a heart full of hope and hands that had already scrubbed too many floors. He was charming in that way young men sometimes are, loud laugh, fast talker, promises like confetti. I thought love meant endurance, and I was ready to prove it. So I endured. His job came first, always. His moods, his temper, his disappearances. I didn't call them that back then, I just said he was working late or blowing off steam. But I knew. And still, I stayed. Not because I was weak, but because I believed in holding things together. Then came Daniel. My boy. My miracle. The first time I held him, I thought, this is it. This is the thing I was meant to do. Every sleepless night, every runny nose, every skinned knee, it was all worth it. I became a mother with the same devotion people give to religion. I found purpose in peanut butter sandwiches, in science fair projects, in ironing little collared shirts for picture day. I didn't care if my hair went gray early or if I never had a birthday dinner that wasn't interrupted by a crying baby. I loved being his anchor. His soft place to land. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a person and became a role. Not just to Daniel, but to everyone. At church, I was the one who always brought extra cookies. At work, I was the one who covered shifts without complaint. In my family, I was the dependable one, the strong one, the one who never needed anything. And it was easier to live like that than to try explaining how tired I really was. How lonely. Because when you're the giver, the world never stops to ask what you might need in return. They just take, smile, and move on, assuming you'll always be there. I remember one afternoon when Daniel was 12, I'd just gotten home from a double shift, feet aching so badly I had to peel my shoes off like they were part of my skin. He met me at the door, excited about some school trip, talking a mile a minute. I smiled, nodded, pulled out the checkbook. We didn't have enough, not really, but I figured I'd skip groceries for the week, make do with what we had in the freezer. That night, I went to bed hungry, but I told myself it was worth it. He deserved to feel like all the other kids. There were so many moments like that, I lost count. Times I put my needs so far behind everyone else's, I forgot I even had any. I skipped doctor appointments. I passed up job opportunities because they conflicted with Daniel's schedule. I wore the same coat for 10 years so I could buy him a new one each winter. And I did it without resentment, or so I thought. But now, looking back, I wonder if that's the cruelest trick, to convince yourself that love means erasing yourself bit by bit, until one day, you look in the mirror and don't recognize the woman staring back. Even after Richard left for good, no note, just an empty closet and a hollow ache in the walls, I kept going. I went to work the next day like nothing had changed. Packed Daniel's lunch. Folded his laundry. I didn't cry until weeks later, when I was washing the dishes and a song came on the radio we used to dance to in the kitchen. It hit me then, not just the loss of a husband, but the unbearable realization that no one was coming to take care of me. Not now, not ever. I was the caretaker. That was my station in life. Still, I held my head high. I showed up for every school meeting, even when I was the only mother there without a husband beside her. I worked 2 jobs. I saved every penny. I cheered at every graduation, even when I could barely keep my eyes open from exhaustion. And when Daniel got older, when he started making his own way, I thought maybe things would ease. Maybe he'd see me not just as a mother, but as a woman. A person. Someone worthy of care. But habits die hard, and the truth is, I'd trained him, unintentionally, to believe I would always carry the weight. I remember the first time he asked for money as an adult. It wasn't even a big amount. Just something to cover a deposit or a bill. He was embarrassed about it, I could tell. And I gave it, of course. Without hesitation. But that moment planted a seed. Not in him, in me. A quiet question. What happens when you're always the one doing the saving? What happens when the people you love start to expect it, not as a kindness, but as a right? I brushed it off at the time. Told myself it was temporary. That he'd find his footing soon. That things would balance out. But they never did. And I never asked for anything in return. Not when I babysat his daughter for weeks at a time. Not when I paid for his dental work. Not when I covered his rent one December because he said work had been slow. I told myself I was just helping. That this was what mothers do. But it wasn't helping. It was erasing. Slowly, surely, piece by piece. I gave and gave until there was nothing left but the expectation that I'd give again tomorrow. And when I finally couldn't, when I discovered what he'd done to my accounts, it wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a betrayal of the story I'd told myself my whole life. Because I believed love was sacrifice. I believed showing up meant setting myself on fire to keep others warm. And for a long time, I thought that made me strong. But maybe strength is something else entirely. Maybe it's saying no. Maybe it's letting someone fall, even if it breaks your heart, because you know they need to feel the ground. Maybe it's daring to ask, just once, what about me? Not out of selfishness, but out of survival. Out of dignity. Out of the simple, stubborn truth that I matter too. The deeper cut. It started with something small, a receipt left out on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping. I was wiping crumbs off the surface after making toast for Lily, my granddaughter. She likes raspberry jam, the kind with seeds, just like her father did. I reached for a sponge and there it was, a bank withdrawal I didn't recognize. The amount wasn't huge, but it had my account number on it, my signature forged in a shaky hand pretending to be mine. At first, I thought maybe it was a bank error. I didn't want to believe the truth. Not yet. I called Daniel that night. My voice steady, my words careful. I asked if he'd used my card recently. There was a pause, just a breath too long. Then the excuses began, all tangled and flimsy, something about a temporary emergency, something about meaning to pay it back. I barely heard the rest. The blood was rushing in my ears, and my heart thudded with something I hadn't felt in years, betrayal, not from a stranger, but from my own flesh and blood. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just sat there, phone to my ear, silence thick between us like fog. After I hung up, I didn't cry. I sat in the same spot on the couch, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. The one where I'm 19, in lace sleeves, smiling like I have no idea what's coming. That girl wouldn't recognize the woman I've become. I thought about every lunch I'd packed, every bill I'd covered, every bedtime story I'd read when my bones begged for rest. I thought about all the times I told myself I was doing the right thing. And then I asked, for the first time in my life, what if the right thing was also the thing that was killing me? That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the ceiling fan whirring above me, thinking about all the things I'd ignored. Not just the money, the way Daniel spoke to me when I said no, the way he acted like my home was his storage unit, the way he never asked how I was doing, only what I could do for him next. And I thought about Lily. Sweet, bright Lily who watched her father treat me like a doormat. What was I teaching her? That love means never having boundaries? That it's okay to use people if they love you enough not to say anything? The next morning, I opened the drawer in my desk where I kept old letters and forgotten cards. I found one from my sister, written decades ago, back when I still had time for long walks and longer phone calls. In it, she wrote, "You have always given more than you had. I hope someday someone gives back to you." I don't know why, but reading that felt like someone had reached through the years and wrapped me in truth. I sat with that line for a long time. And then I got up, walked to the mirror, and looked at myself like I was trying to find someone I'd lost. What I saw was a woman with deep lines etched by years of smiling and worrying and waiting. A woman with soft eyes and strong hands and a spine that had bent but not broken. I saw someone who had spent her whole life loving others but had forgotten to love herself. And something shifted. Not like lightning or fireworks, more like the slow opening of a window on a stuffy day. A breath of air I hadn't realized I needed. I whispered out loud, "No more." Just 2 words. Small. Simple. But they felt like a vow. Like a promise to the girl I used to be. I started making changes that week. I called the bank, filed the report, set up new protections. I didn't tell Daniel. Not at first. I wanted the boundaries to be mine, not a punishment, but a declaration. I cleaned out the spare room and turned it into a space just for me. Books, a chair that doesn't hurt my back, a lamp that makes everything glow golden at night. I started writing again, just little bits. Things I remembered. Things I dreamed. For the first time in years, my words didn't revolve around someone else's needs. They belonged to me. They were mine. Baby steps toward myself. The morning I called the bank felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was ground below. My hands shook so bad I had to press them against the counter just to keep from dropping the phone. I'd rehearsed what to say all night long, whispering the words into the dark like a prayer. But when the line connected, and a man's voice said, "Thank you for calling First Horizon Bank," I almost hung up. Something in me still wanted to pretend this wasn't happening. That I hadn't been betrayed by the very person I gave everything to. But I didn't hang up. I took a breath deeper than I thought I could manage and told him why I was calling. I remember how my voice sounded, clearer than I expected, stronger than I felt. I told him about the missing money, the transfers I didn't make, the account that wasn't mine. And when he asked if I had any idea who might be responsible, I said the name I didn't want to say out loud. That call was the first time in years I did something for myself without waiting for someone else to do it for me. Not for Daniel, not for anyone else, I did it for me. It wasn't dramatic or heroic, but it felt like breaking through ice. Like I finally remembered I had a right to protect what was mine. And once I started, I couldn't stop. I began talking to myself differently, in quiet moments between making tea or folding laundry. You matter, I'd say, like teaching myself a new language. You have rights, I whispered one morning while looking at my reflection. This isn't your fault, I reminded myself when the guilt tried to creep in again. Those words felt awkward at first, like borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. But slowly, they started to settle into me. They became part of me, piece by piece. One of the next things I did was start locking my door at night. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Just turning a key, hearing that soft click. But I hadn't done it in years, not since Daniel was little and used to sneak in late from hanging out with his friends. Back then, the house was always open, always welcoming. Neighbors dropped by unannounced, friends stayed for dinner, even strangers knocked sometimes. But after what happened, I couldn't pretend anymore that everyone deserved entry just because they knew me. I locked the door, and then I locked it again the next morning just to be sure. It wasn't fear that made me do it, it was awareness. A new understanding that I had the right to protect what was mine. Even if it meant closing off part of myself. Even if it meant letting go of the version of me that always kept the door open no matter what. Even if it meant changing. I went to the credit union the next week to set up new accounts and tighter security. I walked in feeling older than my age, like every step carried the weight of everything I'd lost. The teller was young, maybe in her 20s, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. She listened carefully as I explained what had happened. When I finished, she didn't rush me. Didn't look away. Just nodded and said, "You're doing the right thing." Then she helped me change everything. Passwords, alerts, credit freezes, new cards. As we worked, she looked me in the eye and said, "A lot of people come in here after being taken advantage of by someone they trust. You're not alone." Those words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I thought this was my fault, that I had let it happen, trained him to take from me without asking. But sitting there, listening to her speak with such calm certainty, I realized, this wasn't weakness. This was awakening. This was healing. Still, resistance came quickly. Daniel found out I had reported the theft. I'm not sure how, but he showed up at my house a few days later. He stood in my living room like he had the right to be there, face tight with anger, and something else I recognized too well, guilt. "How could you do this to your own son?" he asked, like saying it would undo everything. His voice cracked a little on the word son, trying to pull at the strings of our shared history. And for a second, I almost caved. Almost apologized. Almost reached for the familiar role of mother first, mother always. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down in my favorite chair, the one I bought after he moved out, and said, "How could you take from me without asking?" He tried everything. Said it was a misunderstanding. That he was only borrowing. That he was going through a hard time. Tried to remind me of all the good times, of how close we used to be. Tried to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. But I stood firm. Not in a loud way, not in a shouting match or slammed doors. Just in a quiet, unwavering way that said, "I see you now. I see what you've done. And I won't let it happen again, When he left, he didn't hug me goodbye. I watched him walk to his car from the window. Watched him drive away without looking back. And I didn't cry. Instead, I went into the spare room, the one I had turned into my space, and closed the door behind me. I lit the lavender candle I kept on the windowsill. Sat in the chair I had picked out myself. Picked up the notebook I had started writing in. And for the first time in a long time, I wrote something that wasn't about anyone else. I wrote about the girl who once believed love meant giving everything away. I wrote about the mother who gave more than she had. I wrote about the woman who learned, finally, that she matters too. And I kept writing. Little by little. Piece by piece. Claiming my life back, one sentence at a time. The truth I couldn't ignore. I found the notebook in the back of my closet behind the Christmas boxes and Richard's old sweaters that still smelled like him if you held them long enough. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another one of Daniel's things left behind when he moved out or came through town without notice. But when I opened it, something inside me tightened. His handwriting filled the pages, messy but deliberate, like he had meant to be understood. There were dates, account numbers, passwords, even reminders about security questions and how to answer them using details only someone who knew me well would know. I sat on the edge of the bed holding it like it burned, like if I let go it might explode or vanish before I could fully understand what I was seeing. It wasn't just theft. It was planning. It was calculation. Every line on those pages was proof that he hadn't stumbled into stealing from me, he had walked straight into it, eyes wide open, prepared, confident. He had studied me. Used everything I had ever told him, every story I shared, every detail of my life like it was a tool instead of a bond. And maybe that hurt the most, not the money, not even the betrayal itself, but the realization that our closeness had been turned against me. That the very things I thought connected us had been repurposed into weapons. Not love. Not care. Just quiet preparation for the day he could take more than I was willing to give. And I hadn't seen it. Not once. All those nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home safely, all the times I forgave him for showing up late or forgetting birthdays, all the years I gave without question, he had taken those moments and twisted them into leverage. I used to believe that being there for someone meant giving everything. That love was measured by how much you could sacrifice. But now, looking at those pages, I saw the truth. Love doesn't mean taking what isn't yours. It doesn't mean pretending someone exists just to serve your needs. And it certainly doesn't mean hiding behind family ties while you hollow someone out from the inside. If I wasn't his protector anymore, who was I? The question echoed in my mind long after I closed the notebook and tucked it away like it was evidence of something darker than theft. For so long, I built my identity around being the one who held everything together. I was the mother who never said no, the friend who always listened, the woman who showed up when others disappeared. I wore that role like armor, thinking it made me strong. But now, stripped of that purpose, I felt hollow. Like a house with all the furniture removed. What did I have left if not the ability to fix things? If not the job of making sure everyone else was okay? That night, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one, each glow marking another moment of silence between me and the life I used to live. The weight of the notebook pressed against my chest, heavier than paper and ink should be. I thought about all the times I had excused him, when he missed family gatherings, when he forgot to call on Mother's Day, when he took more than he gave and I told myself it was just a phase. I had spent years bending myself into whatever shape he needed me to be, until I didn't recognize the reflection staring back at me in the glass. And now, faced with undeniable proof of his intentions, I couldn't look away. That night, I promised myself, no more excuses. No more silence. I wouldn't pretend this was anything other than what it was, a violation, a betrayal, a breaking point. I had given him everything I had, and he had used it against me. And while I couldn't undo the past, I could decide what came next. I could choose to protect myself. I could choose to heal. I could choose to finally put myself first, not as an afterthought, but as a promise to the woman I was becoming. The days that followed felt like walking through thick fog. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt familiar. I kept going through the motions, making tea in the morning, watering the plants, folding laundry, but it was like I was watching myself from the outside. My body moved, but my heart lagged behind, stuck somewhere in the space between disbelief and grief. I kept rereading parts of the notebook, hoping I'd misinterpreted something, that I'd find a note explaining it all, saying it was a mistake or that he had a reason I could understand. But there was nothing. No apology. No explanation. Just cold, methodical planning. I started thinking back over the years, trying to pinpoint when it began. Was it subtle? Had I ignored signs because I didn't want to see them? I remembered all the times he asked for help, small things at first, then bigger ones. Each time, I told myself it was temporary. That he'd find his footing soon. That things would balance out. But they never did. And I never asked for anything in return. Not when I babysat his daughter for weeks at a time. Not when I paid for his dental work. Not when I covered his rent one December because he said work had been slow. I told myself I was just helping. That this was what mothers do. But it wasn't helping. It was erasing. Slowly, surely, piece by piece. I gave and gave until there was nothing left but the expectation that I'd give again tomorrow. And when I finally couldn't, when I discovered what he'd done to my accounts, it wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a betrayal of the story I'd told myself my whole life. Because I believed love was sacrifice. I believed showing up meant setting myself on fire to keep others warm. And for a long time, I thought that made me strong. But maybe strength is something else entirely. Maybe it's saying no. Maybe it's letting someone fall, even if it breaks your heart, because you know they need to feel the ground. Maybe it's daring to ask, just once, what about me? Not out of selfishness, but out of survival. Out of dignity. Out of the simple, stubborn truth that I matter too. I started going through the house, really looking at it for the first time in years. The photo albums, the drawers full of receipts, the stacks of mail I never sorted. I pulled out old journals I hadn't touched since Richard left, reading words I barely remembered writing. I found letters from friends I hadn't spoken to in decades, cards from holidays that felt like lifetimes ago. And I realized how much of my life had passed me by while I focused on keeping everyone else afloat. I had lived in service to others for so long that I didn't know what it meant to live for myself. And now, standing in the middle of my own home, surrounded by pieces of a life I had nearly forgotten, I felt something shift. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was clarity. A kind of knowing that settled deep in my bones. I had spent years believing I had to earn love by giving endlessly, that my worth was tied to how much I could offer. But love shouldn't be transactional. It shouldn't be a debt. It should be mutual. It should be respectful. It should leave room for both people to grow. And if Daniel couldn't see that, if he had used my love as a way to get what he wanted, then maybe the problem wasn't mine alone. Maybe the problem was in the way we had both learned to relate to each other. I started small. I changed the locks on the house, even though I knew Daniel wouldn't try to come in uninvited. It was symbolic, but symbols mattered. I set boundaries with my phone calls, my time, my money. I stopped answering when he called at midnight expecting me to drop everything. I stopped sending checks without asking questions. I stopped apologizing for needing space. And with each choice I made, I felt a little more like myself. Not the version of me that existed to serve, but the version that had been buried under years of selflessness. I went back to the credit union and spoke to the young teller again. She remembered me, smiled when she saw me walk in. This time, I didn't just talk about my accounts, I talked about rebuilding my financial independence. I asked about investments, retirement plans, ways to protect myself better. She helped me open a new savings account under my name only. When I signed the paperwork, I hesitated for just a second before putting pen to paper. Then I wrote my name clearly, firmly, proudly. My name. Not Daniel's. Not anyone else's. Mine. I started writing again. Not just notes about what had happened, but memories. Things I had forgotten. Stories about Richard. About Daniel as a child. About the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays and the summers we spent driving across the country with the windows down and music playing too loud. I wrote about the good, yes, but I also wrote about the pain. The loneliness. The exhaustion. The way I used to ignore my own needs until they became invisible even to me. And as I wrote, I began to reclaim parts of myself I had lost along the way. I bought myself a new chair for the spare room, the one I had turned into my space. I picked one that supported my back, that made me sit up straight instead of slumping forward like I was always waiting for someone else to arrive. I lit the lavender candle I loved and sat in that chair every evening, just to remind myself that I deserved comfort. That I deserved rest. That I deserved peace. And slowly, those things started to feel less like luxuries and more like rights. That night, I sat in that chair and read back through some of what I had written. I didn't cry. I just breathed. Deep, steady breaths that filled the empty spaces inside me. I looked around the room and realized something I hadn't noticed before. I had created a space that belonged to me. Not to Daniel. Not to anyone else. To me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Because here's the thing about truth, it doesn't always bring closure. Sometimes it brings pain. Sometimes it brings loss. But sometimes, if you're lucky, it brings freedom. And I wasn't free yet. Not completely. But I was moving toward it. One step at a time. One sentence at a time. One choice at a time. Claiming my life back, piece by piece. Becoming my own person. I remember the day I walked into the beauty salon like it was some kind of secret rebellion. The bell on the door chimed, and the smell of ammonia and perfume hit me like a memory from another life. I hadn't been inside one in years, decades, maybe. Not since Richard used to bring me flowers after work and tell me how much he liked my hair when it was styled just right. Back then, I did things for other people. For approval. For love. For the idea that looking good meant being seen. But this time, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. This time, I wanted to feel different. To look like someone who remembered she existed. The stylist asked what I had in mind, her voice light and curious. I looked at myself in the mirror behind her, past the rows of shampoo bottles and framed photos of trendy cuts and colors. The woman staring back had soft gray hair pulled into a bun, eyes tired but still sharp, skin worn by years of sun and sadness. Something bold, I said, surprising even myself. She tilted her head, considering. Then she smiled like she knew something I didn't yet. We settled on a deep auburn, rich, warm, alive. Something that would make me feel like I mattered, not just to others, but to myself. As she worked, I watched the color take shape, strand by strand. Slowly, the gray faded into something softer, something familiar. Something that reminded me of the girl I used to be before motherhood swallowed me whole. Before sacrifice became my second name. When she finished, she spun the chair around so I could see. I didn't cry, but I held my breath. There she was. Not the young version, no, that woman was long gone. But there was a presence in her place. A woman who had survived. Who had fought. Who was finally ready to be seen. That same week, I started organizing everything. I gathered the bank statements, the police report, the printed emails I'd saved just in case. I bought a new notebook, one with a hard cover and lined pages, and wrote down every detail I could remember, dates, conversations, patterns. I listed all the transfers, all the lies, all the times he took without asking. I wasn't trying to build a case out of spite, I was building one out of necessity. Because if I was going to stand up for myself, I needed to know I wasn't imagining it. That this wasn't weakness or paranoia or old age forgetfulness. This was real. And I was ready. I called a legal aid office downtown. The woman on the phone was patient, listening as I explained what had happened. She told me they helped seniors dealing with financial abuse, that I wasn't alone. That phrase again, asterisk you're not alone star. It still felt foreign, like a coat I hadn't worn enough to get used to. But I showed up anyway. Sat in a small room with a lawyer who took notes and nodded, who asked thoughtful questions and didn't flinch when I told her about my son. She helped me set up power of attorney protections, freeze my remaining assets, and file a civil claim. As we talked, I realized something. I wasn't just protecting money. I was protecting myself. And slowly, I began to find people who understood. One of the counselors at the legal office mentioned a support group for elder abuse survivors. I hesitated at first. I didn't think of myself as elder, not really. Just older. Tired. Worn. But she gave me the address and said, "You might be surprised who shows up." So I went. The first meeting was quiet, small, a circle of chairs in a church basement, the hum of a vending machine in the corner. Everyone introduced themselves, and I listened, stunned by the stories. Women and men, some younger than me, some older, all carrying the weight of betrayal by those they loved most. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a fool for believing in family. One woman talked about her daughter using her credit card without permission. Another described how his brother had taken control of his home. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, heart beating like I was about to speak in front of strangers for the first time. When it was my turn, I opened my mouth and found words waiting. I told them about Daniel. About the accounts. About the notebook I found in the closet. About the way I had spent my whole life giving until there was nothing left. And when I finished, no one rushed to comfort me. No one tried to fix it. They just nodded. Listened. Said, "Thank you for sharing." And somehow, that meant more than any hug ever could. From that night on, I kept going back. It became my space to breathe, to talk, to hear others say the things I thought only I felt. We shared tips on setting boundaries, on rebuilding trust in ourselves, on learning how to say no without guilt. One man brought cookies once. Another played soft jazz while we talked. It wasn't therapy exactly, but it was healing. Real healing. The kind that comes when you stop pretending everything is fine and start telling the truth out loud. I started taking care of myself in ways I hadn't in years. Small things, mostly. I bought new clothes, not just what fit, but what made me feel good. I painted my nails a soft red, the color of ripe cherries. I lit candles in the evening, not just for scent, but for ritual. I cooked meals I actually wanted to eat instead of defaulting to leftovers or toast. And one morning, I woke up early, packed a little bag with water, a book, and a blanket, and took the bus to the lake near the city park. I hadn't done anything like that in decades. Not since before Daniel was born. The ride was slow, the seats creaky, the windows fogged in places, but I didn't mind. I watched the city pass by, the stores, the schools, the houses where lives were unfolding without me knowing. And when I got there, I walked barefoot through the grass, spread the blanket out under an old oak tree, and just sat. I didn't read. Didn't check my phone. Didn't think about the confrontation coming. I just breathed. Deep, steady breaths that filled my lungs and emptied my mind. Birds chirped. Water rippled. A breeze came off the lake and kissed my face like a whisper saying, "Asterisk, you're here. You're okay, asterisk." And I was. I really was. Maybe not healed, not fully, but healing. Maybe not free, not completely, but moving toward it. With each choice I made, I was becoming someone new. Someone who remembered she mattered. Someone who could sit alone in the world and still feel connected. Still feel joy. Still feel peace. I could feel the confrontation coming, like a summer thunderstorm. Heavy air. Distant rumbles. The sky darkening before the storm breaks. I didn't know exactly when it would happen, or how it would unfold, but I knew it was coming. He would call eventually. Show up uninvited. Try to explain himself. Try to make me feel guilty for standing up. And when he did, I wouldn't be the same woman he left empty-handed. I wouldn't be the mother who always gives. I wouldn't be the woman who pretends everything is fine when it isn't. I would be someone new. Someone who had learned her own worth. And I would be ready. finding my voice. I sat in my own living room that morning, the same one I'd lived in for over 30 years, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, it felt like mine. Not just physically, though the absence of Daniel's things helped, but emotionally. The couch was still worn in the same spots where he used to sit when he visited. The coffee table still had a faint ring from his soda cans. But I no longer felt like I was waiting for someone else to arrive. This was my space now, and today, it would be the place where I finally said what needed to be said. The lawyer arrived early, dressed in a navy suit with a folder tucked under her arm. She was younger than me but carried herself with the kind of calm that made you believe she had seen this before, and knew how it ended. We sat on the same side of the room, not out of habit, but by design. I wanted him to see that I wasn't alone this time. That I hadn't come unprepared. That I wasn't here to negotiate or cry or beg him to understand. I was here to speak. To be heard. To reclaim the power I had unknowingly given away over the years, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but silence. Daniel walked in like he owned the place, like he still belonged here. He didn't even look at the lawyer at first. Just gave me that half smile, the one he used when he was trying to soften the edges of something he knew I wouldn't like. "Mom," he said, like everything was fine. Like we were about to have a casual conversation over tea instead of sitting down for a reckoning. I gestured to the chair across from me, and he sat without hesitation. Still so sure. Still so unaware of how much had changed while he wasn't paying attention. He tried to deflect right away. Said he thought I was exaggerating. Said he didn't mean any harm. Said he had always planned to pay me back. His voice was smooth, practiced, like he had rehearsed this version of events in his head so many times he actually believed it. And maybe part of him did. Maybe he had convinced himself that love meant borrowing without asking, that family meant having access to everything without consequence. But I saw through it now. Through him. Through all of it. And then I spoke. Not loudly. Not angrily. Just clearly. Firmly. You stole from me. You lied to me. And I deserve better. Those words had been locked inside me for so long they felt foreign coming out. Like I was speaking a language I had never learned but somehow remembered. They landed in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. For the first time, he didn't interrupt. Didn't argue. Didn't try to explain it away. He just looked at me, stunned. Confused. Like he couldn't believe I had the nerve to say those words out loud. I kept going. I told him about the notebook I found. About the accounts. About the months of quiet betrayal disguised as help. I told him about the nights I stayed up wondering if I had done something wrong, if I had raised him wrong, if I had somehow failed him into becoming someone who would do this. I told him about the support group, the legal meetings, the small choices I had made to take care of myself instead of giving endlessly. I told him that I had spent my whole life believing love meant sacrifice, and that I had finally realized love should never mean erasure. I cried, yes. Of course I did. My voice cracked more than once, and I had to stop and breathe through the ache in my chest. But I didn't beg. I didn't apologize. I didn't give him the out he was expecting. I let the tears fall and kept talking anyway. Because crying doesn't mean weakness. It means feeling. And I had buried too many feelings for too long. I deserved to feel them now. All of them. The grief. The anger. The loss. The truth. At first, he tried to respond the way he always had. Tried to shift blame. Told me I was making it sound worse than it was. Said I was acting like a victim when I was the one who had set the stage for this by giving him so much over the years. As if that justified it. As if my love became permission the moment I showed it. And for a second, I almost flinched. Almost slipped back into that old role, the mother who softens every blow, who makes excuses, who lets things slide because it's easier than facing the pain. But I didn't. Instead, I looked him in the eye and said, "That doesn't give you the right to take from me." My voice was quieter now, but stronger. More certain. I gave because I loved you. But you took because you thought you could. And in that moment, I saw something shift in his face. Not guilt exactly, though maybe a flicker of it, but something deeper. Shock. Realization. Powerlessness. The mask he wore, the confident son, the well-meaning helper, the man who always had an excuse, slipped for just a second. And behind it, I saw a boy who had never learned how to ask for help the right way. The lawyer stepped in after that, calmly explaining the next steps. The civil claim. The documentation. The need for transparency moving forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply laid out the facts, and in doing so, made it clear that this wasn't a negotiation. It was accountability. And watching Daniel sit there, absorbing it all, I realized something. He had never expected me to fight back. He had never imagined I would stand up. Not really. Not like this. When he finally spoke again, his tone was different. Not softer exactly, but smaller. Less sure. He asked if I was really going to do this, if I was going to make it public. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him. At my son. At the man who had taken from me without asking. And I thought about Lily. About what she would learn from this. About what I wanted her to know about strength, about boundaries, about self-respect. And I told him, only if I have to. After they left, I stayed in the living room for a long time. The house felt heavier somehow, like the weight of the words I had spoken still hung in the air. I went to the window and watched Daniel get into his car. Watched him drive away without looking back. And I didn't chase after him. I didn't call. I didn't cry harder. I just stood there, hands folded in front of me, breathing steady, knowing I had done what I needed to do. Later that night, I lit the lavender candle I always kept on the windowsill. Sat in the chair I had picked out myself. Picked up the notebook I had started writing in after everything began. And for the first time in a long time, I wrote something that wasn't about anyone else. I wrote about the woman who had spent her whole life giving everything away. I wrote about the mother who had loved too much. I wrote about the woman who had finally remembered she mattered too. And I kept writing. Little by little. Piece by piece. Claiming my life back, one sentence at a time. Because finding your voice isn't about yelling. It's about speaking your truth, even when it shakes. Even when it hurts. Even when it changes everything. And I had done that. Not perfectly. Not without fear. But I had done it. And that was enough. My new life. The days after everything settled felt strange in a way I hadn't expected. There was silence, yes, but it wasn't the kind that used to follow me when Daniel would leave without saying goodbye. This silence had weight, but not the kind that crushed you. It was soft, almost sacred, like the hush that comes just before snow falls. I would wake up in the morning and sit by the window with my tea, watching the world move outside while I stayed still inside. No phone calls from him. No messages asking for money or favors. No excuses. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I began to hear myself again. I never knew freedom would feel like silence without fear. For so long, the quiet had been heavy with waiting for something bad to happen, for the next request, for the next betrayal disguised as need. But now, the silence held space instead of dread. Space for me to breathe, to think, to remember who I was before I became someone's mother, someone's caretaker, someone's endless well of giving. I started taking longer walks around the neighborhood. Not because I needed anything, but because I wanted to see the sky. I let the sun warm my face and the wind brush through my hair, and I thought, this is what it feels like to be alive for yourself. One of the first things I did was start meeting people, not out of obligation, but out of choice. The support group had opened a door, but I wanted more than just weekly meetings filled with pain and survival. I wanted joy. So I reached out to one of the women from the circle, Martha, and we made plans for coffee. She met me at the little bakery downtown, wearing a scarf the color of summer skies. We talked for hours, about nothing and everything, laughing over scones and stories about our grandkids. After she left, I sat there alone, hands wrapped around my mug, thinking how good it felt to have company that didn't come with strings attached. Soon, those coffee dates became a regular thing. Then I met another woman from the group, and then another. We started calling ourselves the late bloomers, joking about how it took us this long to finally start living for ourselves. Some were older than me, some younger, but all of them had walked through fire and come out changed. We shared recipes and books and memories. We told jokes that made us snort into our lattes. And slowly, laughter returned to my life like sunlight after a storm. I hadn't realized how much I missed it until I found it again. There came a day when I looked around my house and saw things that no longer fit. Not physically, but emotionally. The furniture was the same, the pictures on the walls unchanged, but I could feel the weight of old expectations pressing down on me. I started small. I donated the extra dishes I never used. I gave away clothes that reminded me of a version of myself I no longer wanted to wear. And then one afternoon, I stood in the hallway looking at the large framed photo hanging above the staircase, the one of Daniel and Emmy from years ago, their faces bright and smiling, frozen in time. I had stared at it every day without really seeing it. Until now. I took it down that day. I wrapped it in an old towel and tucked it in the back of the closet, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I needed space. Not just physical space, but emotional room to grow into the person I was becoming. That night, I went online and ordered a new chair for the corner of the living room, the one place where I liked to read and write. When it arrived, I sat in it for the first time and sighed. It supported my back. It held me up. And somehow, that small act felt like claiming ownership of my own life. I started introducing myself differently when people asked who I was. I used to say, "I'm Daniel's mom," like that was the only answer that mattered. Now, I said, "I'm Evelyn. I love reading. I take long walks. I bake cookies too many times a week." I added pieces of myself that had nothing to do with being anyone's mother. At first, it felt awkward, like putting on a dress that doesn't quite fit. But soon, those words became part of me. They weren't just introductions, they were declarations. I was learning how to exist beyond the roles I had played for so long. I was learning how to belong to myself. I bought myself flowers once. Not because I needed cheering up, but just because I liked the color purple. I placed them in a vase on the kitchen table and smiled every time I passed them. I painted my nails a deep red, the kind that matched the cherries in the pie I used to make for holidays. I wore lipstick again, even when I was only going to the grocery store. Not for anyone else, but because it made me feel like I showed up for myself the way I used to show up for everyone else. I started cooking meals I actually wanted to eat instead of defaulting to leftovers or toast. I lit candles in the evening, not just for scent, but for ritual. Small acts of care that reminded me I was worth the effort. One morning, I woke up early, packed a little bag with water, a book, and a blanket, and took the bus to the lake near the city park. I hadn't done anything like that in decades. Not since before Daniel was born. The ride was slow, the seats creaky, the windows fogged in places, but I didn't mind. I watched the city pass by, the stores, the schools, the houses where lives were unfolding without me knowing. And when I got there, I walked barefoot through the grass, spread the blanket out under an old oak tree, and just sat. I didn't read. Didn't check my phone. Didn't think about the past. I just breathed. Deep, steady breaths that filled my lungs and emptied my mind. Birds chirped. Water rippled. A breeze came off the lake and kissed my face like a whisper saying, "Asterisk, you're here. You're okay, asterisk." And I was. I really was. Maybe not healed, not fully, but healing. Maybe not free, not completely, but moving toward it. With each choice I made, I was becoming someone new. Someone who remembered she mattered. Someone who could sit alone in the world and still feel connected. Still feel joy. Still feel peace. I started writing again. Not just notes about what had happened, but memories. Things I had forgotten. Stories about Richard. About Daniel as a child. About the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays and the summers we spent driving across the country with the windows down and music playing too loud. I wrote about the good, yes, but I also wrote about the pain. The loneliness. The exhaustion. The way I used to ignore my own needs until they became invisible even to me. And as I wrote, I began to reclaim parts of myself I had lost along the way. I joined a book club. I signed up for a beginner's painting class at the community center. I volunteered at the library twice a week, shelving books and chatting with kids who reminded me of Daniel before he grew into someone I barely recognized. I didn't do these things to fill a void. I did them because I wanted to. Because I deserved to take up space in the world. Because I had learned, finally, that my presence mattered, not because I gave endlessly, but simply because I existed. I still thought about Daniel sometimes. Not often, but enough to know he was still part of my story, even if he no longer lived in my house or controlled my heart. I wondered how he was doing. If he had found a way to grow. If he had learned what it meant to ask for help instead of taking it. I hoped he had. Not for me, but for himself. Because I knew firsthand how painful it was to live without boundaries. To expect others to carry your weight. To confuse love with control. And I wouldn't wish that kind of emptiness on anyone, even him. But I also knew I couldn't wait for him to change before I could heal. My recovery wasn't tied to his redemption. My peace didn't depend on his apology. I had already chosen myself. And that was enough. Looking back, moving forward. I celebrated my 74th birthday with a brunch I planned myself, at a little cafe near the lake where the sunlight slants in through the windows just right. It wasn't anything fancy, avocado toast, fresh fruit, coffee that came in oversized mugs, but it was mine. And so were the people sitting around me. Not blood relatives. Not obligations. Just friends. Real ones. Martha, who always brought extra napkins and better stories. Linda, who had once run a bakery and still remembered everyone's favorite desserts by heart. And Rosa, the newest of us, who laughed like she hadn't done it in years before finding our group. I lit the candles on my cake with steady hands, not worrying about how many there were or what they said about age. For once, I didn't feel like I was racing against time. I felt like I was living inside it, fully. We sang Happy Birthday off-key and full-hearted, and when I blew out the flames, I didn't make a wish. I just smiled. Because I already had what I needed. A life I chose. People who saw me. Moments that mattered. It was strange how peace settled in over time. Not all at once, not with fireworks or grand declarations, but slowly, like morning fog lifting to reveal the sun beneath it all along. I hadn't spoken to Daniel in months. Not since that day in my living room when I finally told him everything I'd kept locked inside for too long. He called a few times after that. Left 2 voicemails I never listened to. Dropped a letter in the mail I tossed without opening. I knew he probably wanted something. An apology, an invitation back, maybe even forgiveness. But I couldn't give him any of those things. Not now. Maybe not ever. He was part of my past now. Not erased, not forgotten, but no longer allowed to shape my days. And I was okay with that. More than okay. I had learned that silence could be sacred. That not answering a call didn't mean weakness, it meant strength. It meant choice. It meant I was finally putting myself first in ways I had only dreamed of before. One afternoon, I found myself walking into the same bank branch where I had first reported the fraud. The one where I had sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights, clutching a printed statement like it might burn my fingers. This time, I didn't hesitate at the door. I walked in with my head high, not because I was angry, but because I was different. The woman behind the counter recognized me, gave me a warm smile, and said, "Welcome back." I didn't need to report anything this time. I was just checking in. Making sure everything was secure. Updating my contact info. Asking questions without fear. And as I left, stepping back out into the world with the wind catching my hair, I realized something. I didn't feel small here anymore. I didn't feel invisible. I felt like someone who had been through fire and come out whole. I thought often about who I used to be. The mother who gave endlessly. The woman who bent until she nearly broke. The person who believed love meant sacrifice, no matter the cost. If you had told me a year ago that I would be here, standing in my own power, living in my own space, breathing without fear, I would have laughed. Not because I didn't believe in change, but because I didn't believe it was possible for someone like me. But here I am. Not perfect. Not untouched by pain. Not without scars or regrets. But free. Truly free. Not from hardship, not from loss, not from grief, but from the weight of carrying other people's choices on my shoulders. Free to live for myself. To take up space. To speak my truth. To rest when I need to. To say no without guilt. To say yes with joy. And if you had asked me 10 years ago what I wanted most from life, I might have said family. Stability. Love. But now? Now I know the answer isn't about who I'm with, it's about who I've become. Someone who matters. Someone who remembers she does. Someone who finally believes it. And that is more than enough.